Hello and welcome to Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast for all your Columbo needs. I'm Rich Nocella, and I'm here with my sister,
Adrienne Nocella.
And this episode we're going to talk about is The Most Crucial Game, 1972. Starring, of course, Peter Falk as Columbo, Robert Culp as Paul Hanlon, the general manager of the Rockets football team, Dean Yeager as Walter Connell, a family lawyer, Dean Stockwell as Eric Wagner, the millionaire playboy murder victim, and James Gregory reprising his role as a walking Ambien.
He had a little more energy this time around.
He did. So we're 19 minutes BC before Columbo, and we start off with Paul Hanlon in the exclusive manager's box at a football arena, calling Eric Wagner, waking him up from a deep sleep in what we know is around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We get a lot of information in this very brief scene here. So we're looking at a very new money bedroom, just all black Asian furniture, black satin sheets, statue of a Buddha with lingerie draped over it. I feel like this is, again, just a nice segment of the 70s decadence where we have this person who obviously has a lot of money and not a lot of class. And so he's just kind of adopting this because that's just the cool thing to do at the time. You have all this Asian-infused decorations for somebody who probably just eats Chinese food, and that's the closest he gets to any Asian influence.
Yeah, the furniture's all sort of black lacquer with the gold gilding, and it's also setting the scene for that there was a wild night. He's getting woken up from a wild night. Like you said, there's lingerie all over the place. There's empty bottles of cognac.
Yep.
Okay. And then what I found funny was there was like a woman's pump, her heel, but like the heel is completely broken off.
Right.
I'm like, what went on?
That's right. It was like the precursor to the Hangover movies where you just have the scene that you know something happened and you're just not quite sure, but you can kind of fill in the blanks a little bit.
Right.
I mean, he even answers the phone while his head is still under the covers, they're just going way out of their way to just show that this is just some hungover playboy. And so we find out in this scene that Wagner is the general manager, that Eric Wagner is the technical owner because his father, who was the owner, died and has now left everything to Eric, who really wants nothing to do with any of this. He doesn't care about sports. He doesn't care about football. He just cares about carrying on this millionaire sloth lifestyle.
Right.
The excuse for trying to wake him up is that Paul Hanlon says, hey, we've got to fly out to Canada tonight to get a hockey franchise. And Eric says, well, I don't care about hockey. He just doesn't care about anything. He's playing the typical 70s I'm too cool to care about anything and I'm too rich to have to.
Right.
And that's pretty much it. Hanlon keeps heckling him to get into the pool to kind of wake up, do some exercise and swim around for a bit. And so we also see a little bit of their relationship, that Hanlon is kind of acting like a surrogate father since Eric's father died. And Eric doesn't like it, but he also continues to put up with it. So on some level, he does like it.
It's another 35-year-old man acting like a teenager.
Right. Eric says, oh, by the way, that woman that you put me onto brought her little sister. So again, they're giving us a hint as to what kind of night that he had. But it's kind of important to know that this is a woman that Hanlon put him onto. Yes. And that becomes important a little later on, because why would Hanlon be introducing this millionaire playboy to women? And we also find out later that Eric is married. Then after he hangs up with Eric, Paul calls Coach Rizzo, our good old James Gregory, to yell at him, demanding that he come up at halftime to the booth, and aggravated the coach so much that he absolutely guaranteed that the coach was not going to try and call him for the entire first half of the game.
Listen, Paul, what do you mean calling me up like this? Right before kickoff.
Rizzo, I'll call you anytime I feel like it. And get this straight. You can't make up your mind on third down, you call me. On a field phone.
I'll
make your decisions.
Oh, yes, sir, Mr. Hanlon, sir. Mr. Paul Hanlon, yes, sir. Yeah.
Basically, he's using reverse psychology, saying, I want you to call me constantly,
Right.
knowing that the coach would now never call him.
Right.
And
Right.
that's important because part of his plan is to give the impression that he's up there in that owner's box
Yes.
the entire time, when really he's going to sneak out and murder Eric. After he does all of this setup, he gets into a ding-a-ling ice cream uniform and drives out to Eric's place, calls him once again from a phone booth, just again to further nag him, but we find out really to try and help establish an alibi that he,
Right.
Still to make it sound like he's back in the owner's box. He was playing the game on a small transistor radio just to make it sound like he was listening to the game for Eric. Arrives at the pool, takes a giant block of ice out of the ice cream truck that he had, and just smacks Eric on the head with it for him to fall back into the pool and drown.
Right.
But as he's walking away, Paul sees his footprints in water leading away from the pool, so he quickly grabs a garden hose, washes it on down, and then gets back to the box just in time for the coach to come on up at halftime like he made him do, to again make it look like he never left the place. Coach Rizzo is there aching for a fight because he just got yelled at just before the game started.
Right.
Paul Hanlon accomplished what he needed to do. He's now calm. He's just like, all right, coach, you run the team the way you want to.
Right. And of note, their team, the Rockets, are getting murdered.
Yeah, they're losing the first half pretty badly, so he would absolutely have been even more furious had this been a normal day.
They're getting annihilated. But Paul Hammond, they keep on playing this clip throughout the episode. He keeps on saying, your team's getting murdered.
Murdered, yes. Now we're at Columbo. So, but before we get to Columbo, we did have an outstanding question about ice cream pops versus ice cream.
Yes.
That I think got settled here.
Do you?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Now, I could be wrong, and so now you can tell me about that. But it clearly says ding-a-ling ice cream on the side of the truck, right?
Yes.
Okay. But what it's advertising are fudge bombs, which is a popsicle on the side of the truck. Hanlon himself, after the murder, pulls out an ice pop and takes a bite out of it.
Yes.
Columbo, much later on, comes in with a popsicle stick saying, boy, this ding-a-ling ice cream is the best ever. Now, I don't know, maybe it's partially solved. Maybe it's ice cream and ice pops because trucks can do both. But to me, I feel like we accidentally stumbled upon a California slang for, like how soda is called pop some places and called Coke other places, no matter what the flavor. I feel like Californians call ice pops ice cream regardless.
You know what? I'm going to have to agree with you. And I'm going to I have nothing else to say to that. I could be like annoying and be like, well, a fudge pop is kind of ice cream. But I'm not going to because I think you're right.
Anyway, I'm gonna at least in my own brain, I'm going to consider that resolved because that was always bothering me. They said, oh, get an ice cream, and they're clearly ice pops. So
you know what? Because to me, watery, sugary are ice pops and not ice cream.
Yeah. Because there's no cream.
But I think an argument could be made for, like those like strawberry shortcake ice creams that are on a popsicle stick.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if we're just going to have an ice cream podcast next, but
I mean, that might be the natural next step for us. I'm going to resolve that. I'm just going to say Californians call things slightly different things just because every place does. So I'm going to pretend that 1970s California called ice pops ice cream. My brain can now rest.
Okay. That's your loose end all tied up.
The little things, they bother me.
I like how we stopped to talk about that. Should we talk about the hilarious fact that Robert Culp, who's got to be, 6'2", 6'3"? He has to maybe 170 pounds. He's like a big guy. Very tall, very slender man. The idea that he's now going to draw even more attention to himself by dressing up as a ding-a-ling ice cream man with the paper hat and then cat eye sunglasses and be like, you know what? I'm going to just seamlessly blend into this crowd. I am the tallest, skinniest, handsomest man with a mustache.
Yes.
Newly for season 2, I got a mustache, and I'm just going to now just sort of slink out of here drive a truck that I'm too tall for. Did you see his knees were in his chest when he was driving that dingling truck?
It was like The Simpsons. This was the largest
Yes.
card I could afford.
Yes.
The cat's eye sunglasses were the best. I guess while we're at it, when he was walking out of the stadium as the game was about to start and they were playing the Star Spangled Banner, there was another ice cream salesman off in the back that, boy, he wanted to make sure everybody knew he was there. He was belting out the Star Spangled Banner, tilting his head back and forth, really mouthing those words loud. I'm like, wow, that's somebody. I mean, did they have contests back then that if you won, you got to be in an episode of Columbo?
That extra was just like, this is my big debut.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm loud. Take note, America.
And it was great. And it worked completely because I was looking at him practically instead of Robert Culp. That's
50
why.
years later, yeah.
That's why he was able to sneak out of there. He knew that the ice cream salesmen there were going to sing the Star Spangled Banner.
It's just so funny to see Robert Culp like he looks so distinguished, and he's just wearing the dingling ice cream paper hat is what did it for me, truthfully.
And even then, he had to take it off almost immediately once he got in the car. That did not last long. Yeah.
No.
I guess we should go back to the episode. So now we're cutting to Columbo listening to the ball game at the scene of the accident at that point, because they're not sure it's a crime yet.
Police Department, Lieutenant Columbo. Would you mind if I came in?
And just the usual kind of funny, Columbo's distracted by something. In this case, it's the ball game. And I guess it's important because that's how Columbo remembers that the first half of the game, the team was really doing very poorly. Like you said, they were getting murdered. They have the coroner who just wants to go home. Everybody just wants to go home. It's like, okay, this rich billionaire playboy drowned in his pool. Come on, guys, let's call it a day. I got guests waiting for me.
He drowned in his pool. And wait, we didn't talk about, I know that we talked about like the decor of his bedroom, but did you see that he was wearing like the Brady Bunch cursed Greg Brady tiki necklace? But it was huge. It was like if you had like threw a luau themed party and you went to Party City and bought a centerpiece for your outdoor like picnic table, throw a rope around that, and that's what Dean Stockwell was wearing while swimming in the pool and being a brat about it.
And smoking honestly, in the pool.
He was smoking in the pool. And then honestly, all he really had to do was just put a bunch of like sand or rocks, somehow weight down that necklace, because that would have drowned him if he jumped in the pool. It was so tremendous. It's like, again, the size of a toaster, and he's swimming with it.
Yeah, or he could have waited 10 minutes and he probably would have just died of natural causes, the life he was living.
No kidding. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so Columbo's at the scene. He's even complaining about that it's a Sunday. Nobody wants to be there. They just kind of want to wrap it up because this is quite clearly an accident.
Right, and we have the return of the coroner who should have had his own show from Deathland to Hand, the last Robert Culp episode. So maybe this coroner only shows up on cases where Robert Culp was the murderer. I don't know.
This guy got it all right in Deathland's Hand, right? And then got it all wrong for this one.
This time, he definitely had his I have Sunday guests brain on, because it was just, hey, look, the guy was diving, hit his head, drowned in the pool. Well, what about the water over there? I mean, it's a pool. There's water. I don't know what you want.
Yeah, I have a statement on this murder. I thought this was a brilliant murder plot, because the weapon wasn't used to actually kill him. The weapon, which was the ice block, was used to just render him unconscious.
That's right. He wouldn't have a fractured skull. It would just be a concussion. Yeah.
Just a concussion to knock out Eric, and then he just drowned. And he didn't drown with like fresh water versus salt water versus bath water versus pool. Right. No, he drowned in the pool, and that's how he actually died. And then there's no murder weapon left at the scene.
No, because he tossed the ice cube into the pool to melt.
So I thought it was actually a brilliant murder plot.
I would say that this was on par with Lady in Waiting, except that for him to physically get there was very complicated.
Yes. Well, and then also he is dressed like the most conspicuous disguise of all Columbo. Like, he didn't blend in. I think it's probably hard for Robert Culp to blend in anywhere, but dressed in all white when you look like that is just not going to blend in anywhere. Also, we should mention that on his way, he does pull over to make the phone call, but when he did, a little kid came running out looking for ice cream. That kid never got her ice cream.
No, and for that alone, that cost him a few ticks on the sympathy meter later
Yeah.
on. I actually thought that was going to come back to bite him, but it never technically did.
It technically didn't, but kind of did. Yeah.
You'd think he'd get out and just toss her in ice and just get on with his way, but
yeah, exactly.
But
so
he had killing to do, and by the way, if he had, he wouldn't have gotten caught because the timing would have been different.
Yes.
But we'll get to that. Columbo just walks right into the pool. There was no way to make that look good or to make it look different. He walks down the steps and then keeps going right until his right foot gets completely submerged and he looks all shocked and surprised. And then he kind of half turns around and feels the water on the tiles, the pool patio, I guess, or whatever you want to call that. And he tastes it.
Yes.
And then he pauses and scoops up some pool water and tastes that.
Yes.
And I don't know, this, even for Columbo, I felt that was a leap for him. I mean, I know that we know him as like a superhuman detective, but for him to feel water on the side of a pool and say, hey, there's something strange about this water, let me taste it.
Right.
And then taste the pool water to compare it, even as huge a fan as I am, I have to say, I don't know that he would have done that. Why did he do that?
No, that's all. First of all, the hose water around the deck would have been dry already. So it shouldn't even have been there. But okay. I mean, I don't even know who alerted the fact that he was dead.
I could actually tell you that because that I only saw this time around when Hanlon was trying to call him before he got a busy signal.
Yes.
And that was because Eric was ordering someone to deliver more alcohol to the house.
That's right.
So I think the plan was for his body to be found much later in the day. Right. And instead, the person delivering the alcohol found the body and called for help, but it was too late. He was dead. Right. So it did accelerate things by probably hours. I don't think. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, that's fair. You know what? That's right. And I do remember that. Okay. Yeah. No, also, I agree with you. I think it's weird that Columbo would now just sort of taste a crime scene. Like, that's a weird thing to do.
It was just weird. I could understand, even if they had him touch the water and hold it up to his nose and smell it and realize the pool is much more chlorinated than this water around here. But it was just strange for him to just take it upon himself because he just immediately tastes it. He puts his hand on it and then just puts it right in his mouth. And I'm like, what is it? Is this Columbo the toddler years? What is this?
It is. That's like, he's like, I'm using all of my senses. Also, Columbo's not blind, so it's like there's no reason for him to be tasting things, and then he would actually see that steps into a pool would lead into a pool. It is really
It's not like he was distracted or he slipped. No, he just walked right into it and then had to have a wet shoe for the rest of the episode. I guess what happens next is that Columbo goes to the football field because he can't reach the guy's wife.
Right, because what Columbo, everyone's ready to call this an accident. And when he's leaving the crime scene, he's like, actually, this is this person. He's this famous. He's like, that's this guy, the guy that's always in the paper, this wealthy playboy that's showing up in all the gossip columns. Or as my daughter would say, hot goss, which is the thing that she's doing, which is uncomfortable. But anyway, so he's like, actually, call in all the troops. I want everything tested, detain all the witnesses, question everybody. And the coroner and I guess he's a sergeant.
A sergeant,
is saying, oh, okay, but this looks like an accident. And Columbo's like, no, we're going to treat this like a homicide. And then he goes to the game to see what's going on.
And I guess we're supposed to be led to believe, because up until that moment, he did nothing but listen to a football game. So the only thing that made him suspicious was the difference between the two water, because that's when
correct.
he said, okay, that's it. No, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it was a sudden shift. Yeah, that's right.
So now he goes to the box because he can't reach the victim's wife, and there really is no other family. And so from all the tabloids, and it's pretty clear that Paul Hanlon is like a member of the family. So he goes to talk to Paul Hanlon, break the news to him. And Paul acts like you might expect, kind of half surprised, but also trying to heavily state, that kid couldn't do anything right or whatever, just trying to be sad, but also set the scene for the fact that this would not be a huge surprise that he would go drunk swimming or whatever is trying to imply there. And I guess the only other thing to just kind of keep in the back of the mind is that we do hear a clock chime while he's there.
Mm-hmm.
And he does, when Columbo says that he was found dead, he turns the volume down on the game that's playing. But when Columbo says, but I'm treating it like it might be a murder, he turns the radio completely off.
Oh, there was just this water around the pool decking.
Well, that's normal for there to be water around a pool, isn't it?
Yes, sir. But not fresh water, no chlorine in it.
So, his death was an accident. There must be some simple explanation.
Well, that's why I said it looked like an accident, sir, because if someone had used a hose around there, like to maybe hide something or make it look like Mr. Wagner was diving, well, that's my problem, sir. I sure don't want to bother you with that now.
But then that's really kind of it. So then he leaves to talk to Coach Rizzo. When he talks to Coach Rizzo seems genuinely upset, for one thing, and that he did feel bad for the kid. But, we find out a little bit more of Eric's history, the fact that Eric's father was hoping that he would be a star quarterback, and he really could never live up to his father's dreams, so he just kind of went the other way and just became a complete, I don't want to say complete waste, but basically just wanting to be a rich playboy and sleeping in and drinking and having parties despite being married and, but the important part is that that's when Columbo finds out that Hanlon yelled at the coach just before the game and then was very calm and like, you do you at the halftime. And Columbo had even said, gee, I don't remember us doing that well in the first half. So
despite, honestly, he yelled at him before the game for his, I guess, plan. I don't know anything about football coaching plan. I don't know if that's a thing. He yelled at him about that. And then he should be validated, actually. Paul should be validated because his coaching plan was bad. They were getting destroyed on the field. And then you would think he'd still be even more infuriated by the time Coach Rizzo went up for halftime. He's like, hey, you know what? You're doing a great job. It's okay. Let's just keep on going. So he was
at
all
the very least, he should have given him a few I told you so's.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what Columbo learned. He's like, oh, that doesn't make sense.
That's a discrepancy that does not fit with this character because Robert Culp is very good at playing an intensely angry guy. We find out that, again, in this episode, he's also an intensely angry guy.
He's very angry in this episode. He just sporadically screams at the top of his lungs at everybody.
And then it's calm again. Now we're seeing the inside of the house. And again, brief sidebar, is this the same inside house as Murder by the Book? Because it seemed very familiar with the glass. Okay.
It definitely is in the door. It's where Cassidy was getting interviewed by the
hat with the woman.
Yes.
They're at the house. They've made some kind of impromptu office in the middle of the living room, I guess, for some reason, where they have a reception desk set up. They were trying to make all kinds of arrangements for this very wealthy person who just died with all of these other business dealings going on. So they have a full-time brand new receptionist trying to field all of these things.
Right.
And that's when Walter Connell comes onto the scene. He's been the family lawyer of the Wagner family for 40 years.
And he says that he was best friends with Eric's father. So not only was he the family attorney, he was a very close family friend.
He only found out about Eric's death on the radio. So he wasn't even being that close to the family and that close. I mean, if you're a friend of somebody for that many years, that person's son becomes kind of like, an informal nephew,
Yeah, of course.
And so he's upset about that. He's also, this is where we find out a little more of the dynamics, that we find out that Hanlon kind of came in, not out of the blue, but he came in to help to manage the team when Eric's father died because Eric didn't know anything about running a team, and how he's kind of cemented himself. He really kind of dug himself in like a tick. He was brought in to manage the team. And then all of a sudden he then started to manage everything. And it was good in the beginning because that's when he got him a couple of $1 million of 1973-72 money.
That was a $14 million hockey deal, by the way.
Oof.
That's a lot of money.
So a lot of money.
In today's money, it's $14 million.
Yeah, that Eric didn't seem interested in.
What did he say? A bunch of penguins? He called them a bunch of penguins?
Well, he said hockey's for penguins.
Yeah.
Which was a great line. And so when Columbo meets the lawyer,
yeah.
we get the first ever incidence of the cliche that everybody says. He literally asked the lawyer, how much do those shoes cost? You know, how much did you pay for those shoes?
Right.
Sir.
Yes?
You don't mind if I ask you a personal question, do you?
No.
What'd you pay for those shoes?
I think about $60.
I stepped into some water yesterday. I ruined mine. You don't know where I could get a pair that looks like that for around 16 or 17.
16 or 17. Sorry, I don't really, Lieutenant.
Thank you.
And he asked a couple of other people where they got their shoes for that episode because he, of course, destroyed his by waltzing right into a pool.
How many shoes do you think Columbo's ruined then? If he's walking around tasting pools and walking into everything. But yeah, so he ruined his shoes. So he was asking everyone. And of course, he's asking this high-powered attorney,
yes.
Where he got his, I'm assuming the equivalent of like Gucci loafers or something that he got his.
Well, again, I mean, if there was $60 shoes in 1972.
It is $450 today.
Yeah. So that's a really expensive shoe.
Yeah.
There are some phone calls that every time the receptionist picks up the phone to talk or passes it over to somebody else to talk, there's a really annoying buzz. It's so annoying that I actually wind up very often blotting out that entire segment of the episode because it just seems like a lot of clutter and mess and goings on and Culp shouting and that annoying buzz.
It's very frenetic. It's very loud, like you said, but they really did have that buzz go on the entire time to the point where it was so jarring that I think it's unusual that Columbo was the only one that did notice it.
Yes.
No one else noticed it. Like, I have to say, I've definitely been in places where, like, there's been, like, feedback or something like that, and you stop what you're doing to address it.
Yeah. Literally nobody said, and it's to the point where it's louder than the call. It was just, it's almost like the script called for a buzz. Right. And then when they did the sound editing later, they put in a buzz so loud that it didn't really fit the scene. Like, they might have been afraid if it was too subtle, people wouldn't notice it.
Yeah.
There wasn't a reaction shot from Columbo saying, "What's that buzz?" It was just in the background. And then as soon as he hung up, it stopped and there was glorious silence.
Right. And like, it really wasn't even a buzz. It was really like feedback. Like,
yeah.
It was really, I won't do it because I annoyed myself just now, but yeah.
What? Oh, it's you again, Miss Rakoji.
Hanlon is just sparring a little bit with Cannell. There's obviously a power dynamic because Cannell was the big-ish boss for 40 years, and now Hanlon's really completely taken over. And Columbo says, "Oh, that guy really knows how to take charge once he's left."
Yeah.
So it's almost like you could even argue that he was needling the lawyer for some reason,
Yeah, I think he was, though.
I think so, too. And so Hanlon leaves saying, "Hey, I can't talk. I've got someplace to be," and he leaves quickly. And then Columbo says, "Well, this is just part of a routine murder investigation." And that's kind of the first time that it's flat out called that. We saw him in the beginning say, "Call out the troops," basically to process this scene. But he's now really officially calling it a murder investigation,
right?
To the point that the lawyer even said murder, after Columbo left, because Columbo said it and he left. And so he followed Culp to the airport, where he caught Hanlon in a phone booth at the airport on a clearly surreptitious phone call. And then, of course, Hanlon looks over, sees Columbo, and ends the call and gets out.
Right.
And Columbo gives him that wonderful needle.
Columbo, what are you doing? You following me?
Well, sir, it just seemed like a funny place to make a funeral arrangement.
Because that was the excuse he had left to go.
Right.
And so Columbo has caught him where he wasn't supposed to be, making a phone call he wasn't supposed to be making, but he also needles and harasses and annoys him enough to get out of him that he's actually meeting Eric's widow at the airport. She's finally coming back from Acapulco.
I would do a lot of charity work if it involved me going to Acapulco.
Yes, charity work going to Acapulco when your husband is a multimillionaire, it's a nice thing to do.
How very giving.
And at the airport, just before he's about to meet the widow, Columbo does drop a fairly significant bomb, saying that the Ding-a-Ling Ice Cream Corporation doesn't have a route in the area that he was found in. And so that's where I think the kid did and didn't bite him, is the fact that that truck was spotted in the area, but shouldn't have been.
Right. Like, they didn't hammer that home, but, Columbo did say to interview the neighbors and everything. So maybe it's like, did you see anything unusual? And maybe someone's like, hey, my kid tried to get ice cream from this guy that never comes around.
Right.
Tried to get ice cream from this 6'2" mustachioed ice cream gentleman.
That was definitely another little, hey, in case you haven't figured it out by now, I'm super onto you. So after that, the two meet and the widow just completely breaks down in Culp's arms. Are we supposed to get a hint that maybe they're having an affair, or?
I don't think they were having an affair.
Okay.
I didn't get that at all, especially from what we learned later in the episode. I don't think they were having an affair. I didn't get that idea. I just got the idea that, this is now a brand new family friend who she likes a little bit better than Walter.
Right.
Who's comforting her.
Yes. Okay.
Because her idiot husband drowned in a pool after being an idiot husband who would go swimming after being drunk on cognac.
After being drunk on cognac with a wild party the night before.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
But I didn't know if they wanted to tilt it that way or not.
It could have been. I just didn't pick up on that.
Okay. Once again, multiple times this episode, like, she's never questioned, because every time she's about to or whatever, everybody says, hey, she's clearly upset. Get out, leave. It's like, okay, I guess I'll just postpone this homicide investigation till her feelings aren't as hurt.
I know, and they never treat any other, like, in all the episodes we've seen so far, they never do that. They all have to sit through and answer those questions. They in Lady in Waiting, they're interviewing her in her nightgown, and she's like, oh, this widow, well, let's just leave her be. She's very upset.
This widow who couldn't reach for 3 days because she's in Acapulco, right?
Right, she couldn't be reached for 3 days. Meanwhile, I would assume that she would get all of the money. So she has the motive. Also, can we talk about the motive now?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to do it later, but this is a good time to do it.
What the heck is the motive, really?
Yeah, that's honestly what I was wondering, and that's kind of why I was wondering, were they hinting at an affair? Because when Eric died, Shirley inherited everything.
Sure.
I'm going to assume, and we have to assume, because motive was really never mentioned. It's not like Paul Hanlon owed somebody money. It's not that nothing came up. He didn't have a bad orchid habit.
There's no blackmail. There's nothing to blackmail him on.
No, not at all. In fact, maybe even the opposite. I really feel like he has positioned himself to almost be like the Colonel in an Elvis situation, where he's not making the money, but he is absolutely manipulating the people who are making the money.
Agreed. It's
like he still could have left Eric alive and still continued to manipulate the money, unless he was afraid Eric was going to really fire him one day.
Then they should have made their relationship a little bit more contentious, because he should have had an imminent firing happening for this to be a motive. Because
any kind of threat.
Honestly, this really was just, you're a pain in my neck, and I have to Paul really has to be on top of Eric to make him go through with any decision. Eric did kind of say, don't I have enough money at this point? Like, do we really need to do this? But he did reluctantly agree to go to Canada with Paul to secure this deal. The potential to make a lot more money without the hindrance of Eric, maybe. Right. And then the widow would give no hesitation to any of his deals. She'd probably just hand everything over to him, and I imagine he'd get a hefty cut of whatever deal they arrange. But I do not understand the motive for murder in this one really at all.
Yeah, this is the one where we have to do the most heavy lifting to figure out the motive, because everything you just said is probably true, but that was just something that you guessed. And that's so
it's just something I guess, because Eric definitely is irritated by Paul, and he said one of these days, did he say one of these days I'm going to fire you, or I'm not going to
call me kid again and you're through, and he specifically used the phrase, one of these days I'm going to fire you.
Right.
But that sounds like something he says every phone call. It didn't sound like it was a real. Certainly, there was absolutely no immediate threat of losing this lucrative job.
None.
There was, like you said, no blackmail, no extortion, no revenge,
nothing.
if he was having an affair with the wife and he wanted to kill Eric so that she would be a millionaire widow that he could marry, they certainly didn't make that clear, to the point where you definitely thought it wasn't happening, and I thought that it probably wasn't happening.
So they on that angle at all.
Right. So, I mean, it seems to me like his only potential motive is, with Eric dead, I can manipulate Shirley much easier, like you said, and that I can take her with me to Canada to secure these $14 million deals, and
he won't have to call her, to nag her to go swimming to do so. He can just meet me here, and she's like, okay. I don't know. Okay. I really don't know what the motive was, other than that Eric is kind of annoying and slowed down his process.
Yeah, it honestly seemed like such a tremendous risk to kill a human being. To kill a wealthy, famous human being, legacy famous, for what? Very, very unspoken motive, completely.
Weak motive this time around.
Yeah.
Good murder plot, though. I love the murder. I love it. But
great murder plot. Absolutely no motive to speak of. Like I said, if we have to make up the motive, and I think we've made up a really great one. The fact that we both kind of felt similarly, I think it certainly lends itself to that. Right. But give us something. Make that threat of firing real. He could have just done the same thing for the next 10 years.
I mean, who doesn't have an annoying boss that they don't like? Right. And that's really all this is. He's got an annoying boss that he's more competent than. That's literally every single person feels that way.
I was going to say, that's pretty much every middle manager in America.
Yes.
I guess with that out of the way, we now cut to a night scene where
I love this.
Where this 57-year-old private detective is sneaking around in black clothes and a flashlight. And we find out the reason why that horrible buzzing sound or hum was there was because he planted a bug in the phone at the office. Columbo catches him in the act of removing or attempting to remove the bug from the phone.
Yes.
And it's just a fun scene. This is Columbo. We think of him reserving his mean side for killers, but he definitely is not afraid when somebody does something that he does not respect. He doesn't pull any punches there either. This is a guy who basically is planting illegal wiretapping device, and he just flat out threatens his license, doesn't give him his equipment back. He just completely just steamrolls over this guy.
Oh, yeah. Well, Columbo acts like a police officer.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone who's breaking the law. Yeah. He does. That's what he does.
Yeah. So, we're not really used to seeing Columbo act like a standard police officer, which is, what he did, trying to get out of the private detective who hired him to plant the bug. We and Columbo both thought it was Hanlon.
Yes.
In fact, Columbo even said, and this was, again, clever police work. It's kind of nice. It's almost like when every once in a while Sherlock Holmes tells Watson how he came to a decision, and it's like, that's pretty cool. Columbo had said, I knew who I told that we were going to have people come in and search the place again, and that's how I knew that you would come in tonight to try and get the bug out.
Right.
But he told both Hanlon and the lawyer, Walter Cornell, they were both there at the time, so it still didn't tell him which of the two did it. And we weren't even thinking of Walter.
No.
But now it makes sense as to why Columbo bombed Walter. I really feel, and we'll get to our segment later, but I really feel like this time he wasn't quite sure for a little bit who it might have been.
Right. And so we learned that Walter was the one who ordered the bug.
Yeah.
And I have a question. Talking motive again. Really, what was Walter's motive?
Well, Walter's motive, I think, is a little more straightforward because he ordered the bug to be put not only in Eric's house, Eric Wagner's house, but also in Hanlon's office.
Yeah.
And his motive was he was trying to gather evidence that Paul Hanlon was trying to drive a wedge in between the Wagners and himself, Walter. That basically he was trying to say, hey, this guy is embedding himself like a tick and it's cutting me out, and I want to show you, Shirley, that there's a real problem going on here.
So my understanding was that Walter wanted to catch see if I have this right, catch Hanlon supplying or enabling Eric's terrible lifestyle. Is that the idea?
Or anything. You just
It's
that was part of it.
Okay.
But also anything he might have caught Hanlon doing. And again, I guess we're doing more guesswork here.
This is what I mean. Yeah.
But for the purposes of the episode, for what we saw, yes, he wanted to show Shirley some proof that Hanlon was bad for Eric and Shirley. But now you're right. Like, was Walter really dumb enough to think that Shirley didn't know her husband was having affairs?
This is what I'm saying. Shirley knew that her husband was her husband. I was going to say terrible,
Right.
but I guess, like, I don't know, she liked him.
That's
So
the thing. I mean, that's whatever. Okay. That was their relationship.
That's fine. I won't be so judgy,
Right.
but I would like to be judgy because
I think a little bit.
Yeah, because no, I mean, look, she knew he was a playboy, period. I'll just leave it at that. Yep. And so I don't know what Walter was hoping to prove other than that Paul was also enabling his playboy lifestyle. That's what I'm saying. Again, this motive was a little weak for me too. Again, the storyline is great. I love the murder plot. I love the switcheroo. Like, we thought that Paul was definitely the one that ordered the bug, and he wasn't. He too was being bugged by Walter. Yeah. But then again, I just have like some further questions. For me, it's sort of like, but why?
Ultimately, he was hoping to catch Paul doing something bad enough that it would be like, aha, get out of here, Paul, and put me, Walter, back in charge of everything.
Okay.
You know, so it was definitely a selfish motive. This was not him acting altruistically to try and protect Shirley.
No. And it's funny, too, because Coach Rizzo did say that Paul was an excellent, is he a general manager or PR?
Yes,
he was a
PR
guy
manager.
And then became the general manager.
Yeah.
So he said he's excellent at it. Again, there's really no motive for any of this. He's doing his job. He's doing a great job, and everyone's making money. So what's the problem?
Paul Hanlon came on board and immediately made like $2 million in 1972 by securing the rockets and some other themes.
Right.
And he then is trying to make everybody even more money by continuing to expand this network. I think they also have a basketball team, and they wanted to branch out into hockey just to kind of set up the sports empire.
Right.
And he was doing it. I mean, he was dragging Eric by his collar, but he was doing it.
But he was still doing it, yeah. Okay, so I guess that's the big reveal for us as an audience, is that we learned that Paul didn't order the bug, that Walter ordered the bug.
Now, as they listen to the tapes, it completely blows up in Walter's face, because all that happened was he forced Shirley to listen to Paul talk about a wild night. And so she was furious about that. Right. And Hanlon tried to spin it that, when he said this chick that you set me onto brought her younger sister, well, that was a maid service that I set up for him. I was completely unbelievable and absurd.
Right.
But it was enough of a fig leaf that everybody could kind of pretend whatever they wanted to pretend.
Right.
And that's when Shirley said, I am disgusted in you, Walter, with good reason. I mean, he bugged their home.
Yes. What a breach of trust. So it's like you're trying to show us how much we should trust you and not Paul, but Paul didn't bug your house.
No, you tried to show us how much we should trust you by you invading our privacy and the other guys.
Right, exactly.
But it also established, because you could clearly hear the game in progress, that the time of that second phone call was at 2:29 p.m. And the time of death was established at approximately 2:30. And because Paul had made it sound like he was still calling from the office, that would accidentally establish his alibi, that he couldn't have been at the murder scene. Even if it only took 5 minutes to get there, he still couldn't have gotten there in time to kill him.
Right. So this should be a slam dunk for Paul.
Yes. Okay.
This
actually should have been Walter getting himself kicked out of the family and proving that he was innocent of murder. This is basically what the phone calls established.
Right.
So it did not at all go Walter's way.
No. But he had such a good, I loved his style. I liked his little bow tie and his.
Oh, yeah.
He had those like high pants and suspenders. I loved his style.
Yeah, no, he was definitely a 70s elite establishment type style as opposed to hippie type style.
Do you know what he was that was like way ahead of his time? He was a bald guy that shaved his head in the 70s. That wasn't happening then. He looked really cool. I like his whole vibe.
He was very, very Walter White.
Yeah, because I feel like the bald men just embracing their balding and just shaving their head completely really started like midnight. You know who I remember doing it first was Bruce Willis. Is I feel like the first guy I remember being like, you know what, I'm bald and now I'm just gonna shave my whole head and it's a whole look. I feel like it was like Pulp Fiction time, and then people have been doing it ever since. So Walter was a little ahead of his time with his head.
He absolutely was. I think some sports figures were probably doing it maybe even earlier.
Really?
But as far as basketball players, there were a few that just shaved their head. The fact remains that as far as what would fall onto our radar, and either way, it wasn't happening in the 70s. So no, Walter was very much ahead of the game here on that. And he looked very dapper when he was trying to explain why he bugged people he cared about.
I know. He really was very unlikable.
And at the end of that scene, once again, she throws everybody out in the middle of a murder investigation.
This is very funny. I'm going to start taking my social cues from people in Columbo, because we had Cassavetes being like, I cannot handle anything right now. I'm taking a nap. So you have to respect that and leave. And then she's like, you also now have to leave. And I'm not even giving you an explanation.
Right.
Like, I love it. She's like, now everybody leave. And they're like, okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. I guess, well, now we'll leave. I
want to do that. I want to wear like hoop earrings and have glossy hair and just be like, everybody leave. And then everyone listens.
And they all listen. Like Columbo's thinking, well, gee, this woman who's just inherited millions of dollars with her dopey husband is asking us to leave without asking any questions about, was she really in Acapulco? Did she pull a prescription murder and go to Acapulco with a bunch of books and then
I mean, does she have a tennis pro or a ski instructor we don't know about? There's no follow-up questions.
There's absolutely nothing. And you're right. At least Columbo would ask a couple of questions like, hey, I hate to ask, please don't get upset, but I just have to know, is there anybody else in your life? And how could you ask such a thing? But he didn't. He didn't even bother asking such a thing. No. I guess kind of a shortcut.
Right.
But we already know that he knows that she has nothing to do with it. So that's why, it's not really a problem. Columbo is then seen eating chili by the sea, by the bay.
Yeah.
Chili by the Bay.
That should be the name of his autobiography.
Yeah.
Chili by the Bay.
And that's when the private detective comes by basically begging for his license back and his equipment. Yeah. It's $600 worth of equipment.
A lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Like $5,000.
Yeah, that's a lot of money but on the other hand, it's just a little funny that he's asking for his illegal equipment back from a homicide detective.
I know.
The license I can understand, but he probably should have just kind of, cut his losses on that. Because at that time, it was absolutely illegal to just plant wired,
I think it's always illegal to break into somebody's home to plant anything. You know what I mean? I think that there's different states have different laws around one-party recording versus two-party recording, who knows and who's agreeing to being recorded and how it can be used in court. But I think it's always illegal to break in anywhere and, destroy property to plant a device.
By the way, we are recording. I meant to tell you that.
Oh, this is
but that's an excellent point that you say that, because he, of course, didn't actually break in. That's when we found out that the private detective hired basically a personal escort, a very successful escort by the name of Eve Babcock, played by Valerie Harper, good old Rhoda, to be a receptionist for a few days, specifically just to put the bug in the phone. So there was technically no breaking, entering, and that was a real technicality that the private investigator was counting on, but that now let Columbo have one more important lead on the case. Because what we found out going back to the scene where everything was happening and there was a loud buzz and all of that, was that receptionist was new, because the other receptionist was replaced by someone named Eve Babcock, who only lasted a few days.
Right.
And a woman with a foreign name was trying to call while all that was going on, and that was when Robert Culp got to yell again, saying, I'm not taking any messages.
That's right.
And that was the person we find out he was calling from the airport. And we find that all out because Columbo goes to visit Eve Babcock, and she, of course, mistakes him for a John.
I like how we talk about Eric Wagner's decor style, because her decor style is just phenomenal. I want my entire house to look like that. There's porcelain poodle statues with a chain. There's a snake coiled on the
Yes.
coffee table. Did you see that? It's
I
just
certainly
a
did.
taxidermied snake.
Yeah.
There's hot pink wicker furniture. I mean, she's just got it all.
She does. Clearly, she's very good at her job. It actually a very cute little scene where Columbo is taking extraordinarily a long time to declare that he's a police officer because I think he's just having fun with the fact that she thinks he's a customer.
Yeah, that was a great scene. That was fun.
And then, of course, when the actual customer shows up,
Cincinnati Smith.
just a little Weasley guy.
Yeah.
And that is the first time Columbo says, yeah, I'm Lieutenant Columbo from the police department. And he just weasels away. But it was very funny that he said, oh, by the way, about those stocks, I'll call you on them, and left, like pretending he was a stockbroker that was making a house call.
Making a house call to a woman with a coiled snake and hot pink furniture.
So he gets her to kind of admit without really actually admitting. I mean, he makes a lot of assumptions based on her reaction, but we know they're right.
Yeah.
And that is that when she showed up as receptionist, that Hanlon figured out immediately that she was a call girl hired by somebody to be a receptionist for some reason.
Right. He caught her planting the bug.
I guess the idea was he offered her more money just to quit at that point.
Yeah.
When she got angry at Columbo, she started speaking with a Hungarian accent.
Right.
Which was very funny to see Rhoda speak with the Hungarian accent. And that's when Columbo figured out that she was the person with the exotic name. I meant to jot it down and I forgot.
It's like Roja, something like that. Roja.
It is.
Yeah, it's a Hungarian name, I guess.
It's a Hungarian name, and that's when Columbo finally puts together that that was who was trying to call at the house and who Culp was actually calling at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
All those loose ends have now been tied up because it's important to know that Hanlon knew that everything was bugged.
Yes.
Because at first it looked like Hanlon was surprised about that, but now Columbo knows that Hanlon knows that all of his phone calls were being logged.
Yeah, I think the entire plan was to use the fact that his phone calls were being recorded for him as an alibi.
And he used it to great effect. So Columbo goes to the travel agent.
Yeah.
And now let's talk about travel agents for a bit. Because this still might be a little before your time, but
I remember travel agent.
Okay, all right. I wasn't 100% sure. Because if you wanted to go somewhere, you couldn't just get a ticket.
Right.
Oh, I guess you could, because you could just go to Acapulco at a moment's notice. But
evidently, you could just walk into any airport and buy a ticket and get on a plane. And I guess you kind of can still now, but it requires many hours of prep time in order to get to the airport. That's why I was laughing too. At one point when Paul called Eric, they had plans for a 6:00 flight, and Eric's like, okay, just be here by 5:30. And the thought of swinging by and picking up somebody at 5:30 to get on a 6:00 flight to Canada, like out of the country, is insane.
It's terrible what we've lost as a country.
I will say, though, I do wish travel agents were a thing again, because you know what? Everything at first, it's great. You're like, oh, I can save some money because I think I know better than a professional. And let me just book this like cut rate trip to Disney or whatever you want to do to Italy. But you know what? That's an expertise that's then lost, because they really can put together packages and know safe places to stay and good places to be, and, you know, what might be a 5-star hotel on a Yelp review versus actually being there and seeing it's a hostel, you know, like all of these things. It's kind of like a lost profession that I wish would come back. It's now they call it concierge service, but it's really just a travel agent. Yeah.
And I also remember that if you're going to a trip and you were driving, that you could, if you were a member of AAA, you could go into one of their places and they would have a triptych where they would take an atlas basically and then highlight with a magic marker the roads that you would take. You know, ultimately that became MapQuest and everything.
I remember Mom always getting triptychs, but I never really knew what they were. It was like a notepad with a spiral top and he would flip it over.
Yep.
Okay.
But you had these physical maps in your hand. So,
okay, gotcha.
Anyway, little diversion, because the whole reason for his trip inside the travel agent was he wanted to verify if Paul Hanlon had actually made reservations to go to Canada. Like if he didn't actually make those reservations, then he knew that they weren't going to go, and they weren't going to go because he was going to be murdered.
Right.
So they never actually answered that question, because while he was waiting for the clerk to check, And I have to think Hanlon would be clever enough to actually go ahead and make those accommodations. But it was one more loose end he was working on. But while he was there, the cuckoo clock in the office struck 2.
Yes.
And that was the old aha moment that we didn't quite know yet. And I think at this point, he just goes back to the box this one last time, because we're really at the very end of the episode here. And that's when he confronts Hanlon with a lot of all the little things that we had talked about so far. The fact that when he's given some really bad news, he turns the radio down. But when it's bad news for him specifically, he turns the radio off.
Yeah.
And he even did it right now with Columbo in the room, just telling him, yeah, hey, we found this out, turns it down. It's looking bad for you, sir. Click, and he turns it off. So we're treated to Columbo once again playing the tapes, that last phone call, because he's been listening to that call, and knowing Columbo, who's probably listening to it day and night for days on end to try and find something that proves that Hanlon was not in the office when he made that last phone call at 2:29, some sound that was there that maybe would prove it was from a phone booth or something. Hanlon, of course, is looking at binoculars at the game and everything. And there was just this one really great moment, and it was just such a hats off to both Culp and Falk on this. Yeah. I'm sure you know what I'm going to say. Yep. It's when Peter Falk is just seemingly rambling on, getting things set, and Hanlon's like, Columbo, blah, 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 blah. And he's looking at the field, and Columbo says, oh, they're on the 10-yard line, sir.
Yeah.
And so even with all of his rambling, Peter Falk is completely aware of everything that's going on. Nice. And Hanlon puts up the binoculars and then puts them down for a second, and you see a moment of thought where he's realizing at that point, this guy is miles ahead of me here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that registers across his face. And then he puts the binoculars back up and shifts.
Yeah, and turns over to actually look at where they are. And so that was just a wonderful moment, again, unspoken directly, but it's very clear what they established in that moment is basically, oh, yeah, this guy is a lot smarter and more aware than I thought.
Right.
And of course, what we have is the perfect and beautiful timing is, again, Columbo kind of blathering, but playing the last phone call and just saying, I was waiting for a sound that didn't belong there. I was waiting for any kind of clue. And Hanlon says, I'm kind of busy here. What's going on? And he says, and Columbo just holds up a hand, and the clock in the office hits 2:30, because that would be 1 full minute after the call, and you hear that beautiful Westminster chime go off, and the episode ends, because everybody knows that, that it wasn't what was on the tape, it's what wasn't on the tape.
Exactly.
And if he had made that call from his office like he said, we would have heard that Westminster Abbey chime go off. It didn't. You didn't make the call from the office like you said. You're done. And the episode is done.
Yeah, and that was it.
I do like this episode a lot. I think this is a great episode. I don't have a lot more to say about it. I don't know if you had anything more to add before we get into our segments.
Not really. I love this episode. This is one that I don't remember them showing a lot when I was growing up on, WPix or whatever, Channel 11. I didn't see it a lot. So I've only seen this episode probably 3 times.
Yeah, okay.
Including rewatching it for now, maybe 3 times, 4 times.
Wow.
That's it. Yeah, but I really do like this episode a lot.
Yeah, it's really solid. So I guess we can get into the part of the program where we say, when did Columbo know?
I kind of knew it right from the start. It was nothing definite. It was a lot of little things.
This was definitely not a aha moment. I certainly don't think he knew immediately.
No, a lot of times he shows up and knows instantly.
Yeah.
And this time, no, he did. I agree with you.
I really feel that he did not. I think he suspected, but I think the fact that he also was still kind of heckle-bombing the lawyer a little bit, and I think that I don't know that he thought that the lawyer did it, or if he was just kind of being Columbo to the lawyer because he suspected that the lawyer might have been one of 2 people who bugged the place. So again, he's going to harass somebody who did something wrong because that's Columbo. Right. But I feel like he only kind of knew for sure when he basically caught him calling somebody else at the airport I think it took that long for me to comfortably say I think that's when he knew for sure.
See, I was going to even put it after that.
Okay.
I was going to put it, and I think that's a good point. I think he didn't like that. Let me say that.
Right.
Columbo followed Paul to the airport because he didn't believe him.
Right.
And he was proven right. He was lying to Columbo, and he gave some poor excuse that, he just wanted to talk to the widow in private or something.
Right.
So that's why he lied about suddenly
Everything.
leaving. Yeah, everything. So I think that's probably true. You're probably right. I was going to say he didn't really know. I was going to put it until he was surprised to learn that Walter was the one that was responsible for the bug.
I was going to actually make that mine too.
Mm-hmm.
So I could absolutely see that argument. And it's only as we talked about this episode that I thought, well, again, yes, he did follow him to the airport. He did catch him in all those lies.
Right.
And maybe it was in retrospect that he was like, aha, you wanted to use an outside phone because you knew that everything was bugged.
Right.
So even though Walter placed the bug, you knew that the bugs were placed.
Right.
So I could probably put it a little later with you too. This is an odd episode for many reasons. The motive itself was so unclear that it probably was hard for Columbo to know who did it because he really couldn't come up with a great why.
Exactly. Because honestly, the wife really always has the best motive, right?
Sure.
She gets to inherit. The attorney, I would think, would have a good motive.
Right.
And Paul really has the weakest motive out of everybody,
Yeah.
I think.
Really? Absolutely. Not even close. Not even close.
So I think there is that. Yeah, but that's why I struggled a little bit to think about when he knew. And I thought maybe when he was making the phone call, when he caught Paul making the phone call at the airport, maybe that was just a phone call he wanted to make in private. I mean, clearly that's what he wanted, but
yeah.
I don't think Columbo knew even that Eve Babcock existed at that moment.
Right.
So,
well,
he knew there was a secretary named Eve Babcock.
He knew there was a secretary named Babcock, and he knew that there was a Hungarian woman trying to call him at the house. He left the house to talk to her.
Right.
So was that about murder or not? And so I guess I could stretch it to when he found out that Walter was the one who planted the bug and not. And that's what's so strange. That should have really exonerated Culp, but instead, because Hanlon knew that the bugs were placed, that made it all click for him. So if we're going to say it's when he found out that Walter planted the bugs, we almost have to then go even later than that, and only to find out that it was when he found out that Eve Babcock was an escort that was a Hungarian that got
escort.
hired and fired.
Okay, so originally I was going to say that scene.
Okay.
I was going to say when she lost her cool and spoken in a Hungarian accent and he put it all together. I think it all clicked for him then.
Yeah.
With certainty. So that's pretty late in the episode.
That's like within the last 20 minutes of the
really
episode. Is. And you know what? I think I would agree with that.
Then it's settled.
Yeah, I think we have to settle it on that, because then it's my old argument. If not then when? But this is the opposite scenario. It's like, well, he's just about to arrest the guy. He has to suspect him at some point. So right. I think he suspected him from the very beginning, but I think it's fair to say he knew at that moment when he spoke to them. Now it's time to rate the killer on the sympathy meter, from Ruth Gordon being our most sympathetic killer to Dick Van Dyke being our most vicious killer.
I'm beginning to be very fond of you, Lieutenant. I think you're a very kind man.
Don't count on that.
Again, it's just kind of a weird one for me. I didn't have anything too solid on him. I think the complete lack of motive is what's giving me a hard time here.
That's it, yeah.
I think I have to put him kind of midpoint, just because I didn't hate him, but I didn't like him. I didn't think he had any kind of motive at all. I think the killing of him by making him swim laps and then hitting him with a block of ice, pretty mean. That's one of those things where, like you said, the ice didn't kill him, the drowning did. So it's pretty awful to just stand there and watch somebody drown.
Terrible.
I mean,
terrible thing to do.
So I think I have to amend it and put him maybe 3/4 Dick Van Dyke. I think that's where I got to put him for those reasons.
I'm going to put him very close to Dick Van Dyke. Really, really, really very close to Dick Van Dyke. And like you said, this time no one was particularly unlikable. I didn't find him obnoxious. It wasn't like he was taunting Columbo. He was just a guy trying to be like, back off, Columbo. I'm trying to kill somebody and ruin a sports empire. You know,
Right.
so he wasn't like, you know, obnoxious or anything like that. So he wasn't unlikable, but he also wasn't sympathetic, meaning Paul.
Right.
The victim really, although kind of unsavory, wasn't unlikable in the sense that he was just like a harmless party boy, and his wife knew he was a harmless party boy, and you know, he's the poor little rich kid, right? He never lived up to his father's expectations, so that was a rough go. So no one was particularly sympathetic or unsympathetic. So I think just the sheer act of killing someone for really no reason puts you pretty monstrous. So that's why I'm putting him very close to Dick Van Dyke.
I can see that. I think that's reasonable. I think I'll still hold at the 3/4 mark just because I want to reserve close to Dick Van Dyke for the truly vicious. But I could certainly respect your opinion on that. It's this side shy of a thrill killing because he has really there just isn't a solid enough motive. There's almost no motive at all. There's actually a better argument that would be made if he left him alive because sports franchises might be more willing to want to be on board with this eccentric millionaire than, you know, his sensible wife. I don't know, you know.
I mean, that's a fair point. We want to deal with the legacy name necessarily more than a nobody. I don't know. Yeah, I just thought this was completely senseless. So because I, unlike you, value human life, I'm putting him more towards the Dick Van Dyke side.
I have to tell you, not valuing human life has been a handicap occasionally in my occupation as a doctor.
Maybe we shouldn't joke about that.
Now, will it hold up in court?
I mean, come on.
Tell me, Doctor, how do you catch a man like that?
You don't?
You're probably right.
Start to finish, that no one's getting arrested for this. No one's even getting arrested for this one. Hamlin didn't even acknowledge anything. He just sort of stared. So he didn't immediately confess, like in some of the other episodes where I'm like, it wouldn't hold up in court, but you confessed, so now you have this problem. Right. So he didn't confess. I think it's very easy to say my clock was broken. I think that the water on the deck would have been dry anyway. So I think no one's getting arrested in this episode. Nobody. I think this would not hold up in court at all. I don't think they'll make it to court. I don't think the DA would indict.
Well, that's what I mean. In other words, we kind of took it for granted that he was counting that he was investigating this as a homicide.
Right.
There was still no reason, you know, it still comes down to a guy was swimming with a bump on his head and drowned in the pool. There's still nothing else to consider this a homicide.
With a blood alcohol count of probably like 27. You know what I mean? Like it's just like through the roof. So
yeah. So as much as I hate to say it, and I almost feel like we have to invoke Judy on this, but I think I am going to have to just break down and say, no, this probably is not going to go. This is probably not going to hold up in court. Hearing a chime not be played on a tape.
Hearing a chime, I'm sorry, and it's not a clock tower chime. It's a portable clock in his office.
Right.
So that could easily be explained away like, well, it was out for repair. I didn't have it. I didn't wind it. I don't know if you wind those, but I didn't wind it that day.
Yeah, he absolutely could have just said that, and then that would have been the end of it. That you know, just it was a brilliant way to catch somebody. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I have to agree. I don't think the ice cream man's going to jail on this one.
I do not.
As much as I want him to.
But maybe he should have, because that poor little girl never got her dingoing ice cream.
But for that, he should get 20 years. if you have a 9-year-old running up saying, "Hey, mister, I want an ice cream," and you just pull away. You know what? I take it back. I'm putting him up to Dick Van Dyke for that alone. Yes, I forgot about that. The hell with him.
He's a clear sociopath.
He's clearly evil and must be stopped. Well, I guess at this point, all there is left to do is to say thank you for listening, and that we will join you for next time.
Oh, one more thing.
Oh, yes.
So what I noticed in this episode was some pretty high-tech surveillance operations happening by the private detective going in and bugging both Hamlin and Eric Wagner's home. And it's interesting because the private eye was probably the one that bugged Paul's place, because his office didn't have that feedback, because Paul was playing the radio the entire time and you didn't hear that hum.
That's right.
He was on the phone with the radio on and he didn't hear the hum. But when the secretary, Eve Babcock, placed it, who's not a professional of that ilk anyway. She did it incorrectly, and that's why there was that feedback hum. So that got me into, well, what's the deal with bugs? This is very interesting. How does this all really work? Anyway, because, you see from the old movies, they unscrew, the landline.
The receiver.
For the receiver, and they just plant something in there, and then they close it back up, and that's it. So what I did was I went back and I found something that I found very fascinating. And one of the people that's credited with one of the most early inventions of the bug is the guy who also invented the theremin. Now, do you know what the theremin is?
Sure, that musical instrument that goes woo.
Yeah, all those spooky sounds, and it really just plays off like electromagnetism with your hands and the wires and everything. So he invented something called the thing, and that's what they called it. They just called it the thing. And it's this really cool early listening device, which was planted in a wooden plaque from the Soviets that was gifted to the American ambassador to the Soviet Union.
Oh, wow.
So, and it was a seal of the United States seal, and this, what they called the thing, but it was a bug, was embedded into the wood and hung in this guy's office for 7 years. And what's really, really, really cool, because it was presented to the U.S. ambassador near the tail end of World War II, literally within weeks of the war ending.
Wow.
Right? And it was given to the U.S. ambassador to the Soviets as a gesture of friendship. And so he proudly hung it in his office wall, where it stayed for 7 years before it was detected.
That's a long time.
And this is the genius of theremin. The reason why it's really cool is that the thing called a cavity resonator, which means that it lays dormant. There's no electronic parts to it. It only works off of vibrations. So if you scan it with like a metal detector or something, you're not going to find anything because there's no electronic components to it at all. And what it does is when sound waves pass through the wooden plaque to activate the thing, it vibrates, and it only vibrates then. And when that bug is being activated by an external radio transmitter, is the only way to turn it on and off. So when that little bug vibrates by picking up those sound waves, the antenna picks it up, and then you can hear the conversations. So what's brilliant about it is that it's small. There's no power. There's really no electronic part or electric parts to it. And it doesn't radiate a signal unless it's activated by an external transmitter.
Wow.
So it's like sort of ingenious, which means that there's no battery power. You don't have to replace it. It can stay there sort of indefinitely.
Well, I was going to say that's why it could hang on his wall for 7 years. You try doing that with your iPhone and it dies in an hour and a half.
Oh my God, exactly. So it sort of has this like unlimited potential lifespan.
Wow.
And so the only reason it was detected is because a Brit ops 7 years later picked up on the Soviet Air Force radio an American conversation. So then they went through and they looked through everything and they cracked open that plaque and there was the thing.
Wow. So for 7 years, they just hung that up on a wall and the Soviets got to hear every conversation from that American ambassador.
Yeah.
Wow. That is really amazing. That is pretty amazing.
And that guy also invented the coolest horror movie music ever.
Absolutely.
The theremin. So, you know what? Not happy about, betraying the U.S., but super happy about that sound effect.
That's pretty neat.
So, yeah. So anyway, this episode was great. I'm trying to think what's the next one in season 2, but season 2 is a really strong Columbo.
Season 2 is great. It's every episode's a winner. Season 1 had some of the best ever, and then they had a couple, or at least one of the worst ever.
Right.
Season 2, every single one is great. But I got so excited about season 2 that I forgot I was supposed to interrupt you.
I know, you interrupted me with your own interruption.
I did. So one more thing.
Okay.
This episode hinged on the dog that didn't bark. Basically, the sound that wasn't there. They even made a brief reference to it when the private detective was talking to Columbo, and Columbo was saying, I'm listening for something, just to prove that he didn't make this call where he said he did. And the other detective said, well, I don't know, maybe there's a sound of a dog barking or something like that.
Yes.
Well, it was referencing a Sherlock Holmes story, one of the short stories of Arthur Conan Doyle's called The Adventure of Silver Blaze. And the way this mystery went was the trainer of a horse called Silver Blaze was a racehorse. And he was going to try and temporarily disable the horse so it couldn't run as well as it normally did and make a lot of money by betting against it.
Okay.
And to do that, he had a heavy walking stick and a small little scalpel, and he was going to brace the horse's leg against the walking stick and cause a small little injury to the horse's leg that would just slightly take him out but not actually permanently damage him. The horse panicked, of course, kicked him in the head, killing him, and ran away.
Okay.
So what's left on the ground is a dead man with his head caved in and a heavy walking stick next to him and a missing racehorse that he trained. So now you find all this out at the end. I'm definitely putting the cart before the horse on this one. The whole plot revolves around Sherlock Holmes figuring this all out because they were going to blame a stable hand because, you know, he was the other prime suspect in this, which turned out not to be a murder after all. It was just a guy who got killed by a horse he was trying to hurt. But the whole reason it has anything to do with this at all is that there are dogs in the barn, and everybody reported all the sounds they heard, but nobody reported a dog barking. And so that's how they knew that it was somebody who knew the dogs well, because any stranger that came by, the dogs would have barked at. So this is a case where Sherlock Holmes solved the case because a dog did not bark. And it's one of those things where you want to punch a wall when you read it because it's so awful that that's the solution. But it's also completely fair, so you can only get mad at yourself for it. Yes. And that's exactly this type of thing, that Columbo was listening for a sound when he was really listening for a sound that wasn't there that should have been.
I see. That's actually great.
So now I really will say that thank you everyone for listening. The next episode is Dagger of the Mind, which is another excellent Columbo, one of the first ones where he leaves his usual location.
I hate this episode. Heads up. I forgot this was in season 2. I 100% hate this episode so much, but I'll tell you all about it why. I'll tell you all about why next time.
Well, then that sounds like a fun reason to watch. I was going to say, well, maybe we could skip it, but if you really hate it, then that's even better.
No, I'm going to hate watch it, and I'll tell you why I hate it.
That's even better than being bored by it. So please follow us on Instagram at Rumpled Trenchcoat, all one word, on Twitter at RumpledT, on YouTube at Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast, or on SoundCloud at Rumpled Trenchcoat. And until next time, ask not what you can do for your rumpled. No, I'm not going to finish that. I'm not going to.
Don't do that.
That's the
I got shocked. Like I was shocked by that. That's really not that shocking.
It's not, but it's terrible enough. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.